Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of my survival tutorial series, Objective Survive. Um, so last time, as you may recall, we worked on getting the assembly bench, wire jar, extruder, and plate stand built. Kind of going over the general process for getting those, and covering the handful of differences between a vanilla survival start and the start process when using Industrial Overhaul. Um, since then, as you can see, I've since added a second tower, and both towers are sporting a total of 4 wind turbines. Now, this is so that, you know, if I did my math correctly, we should be able to run everything on our platform as we currently have it. We should be able to run most all of that all at once. So, before we get into today's objective, one thing I did realize after recording and uploading the last episode, um, over 50 minutes is an awful long time for a tutorial video, and in hindsight, I probably should have shortened that down, especially considering that other YouTubers and creators have made tutorial videos, those generally average 30 to 40 minutes, usually less. Um, Granted, we do have a fair bit more to cover when running Industrial Overhaul, but moving forward, I am going to try and condense things a bit more where I can. I'm not going to gloss over everything, um, but I'm going to try and avoid going Lord of the Rings uh, levels of description on everything. If you guys run into any problems or if you have questions, please feel free to leave those in the comments, and I will respond there where I can, or if I feel like it's important enough, I will make a separate dedicated video to explain that topic, to answer that question and anything that I feel is related. So, that out of the way, let's go ahead and move on to today's objective, that being building our first rover. Let's grab a bunch of steel plate to start things off. Now, one of my preferred ways excuse me, one of my preferred ways of starting rovers, and this is a trick that I did in fact pick up from Splitsy, is using a rotor as our base. So build up a nice stem. We don't need it to be super tall just because this rover doesn't have a super high clearance already, so we don't need it, sticking way up off the ground. And for our backbone on this, you can use standard armor blocks. I personally just like using the beam blocks, especially in this sense, as they do make it a little bit easier to differentiate, where the vehicle frame starts, as opposed, where the build stem starts, helps differentiate those without needing to go through and repaint things. So, to start things off, we're going to begin by building out a bit of a stem here. So with that set, I'm going to grab our transport container, and we're going to go with the larger one. It's lined up so that it sits flush with that end block there. And we're just going to mount that right on top of our frame. Whoops. this out just a little bit more. And then from the back side, going from this center piece here, go down, 1. Copy that on both sides. And then we're going to leave a space of 3 and set in our next axle. Now, obviously, depending on your terrain and some of your own personal preference, you can adjust how you have your wheelbase laid out. This is just a way that works for me. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to leave a 1 block space here, and this is for the purpose of a bit of decoration. So we're going to go forward, and we're going to build this in as if this were a full-size, lithium battery. So we got all of those. Now, if you're running build vision, you can just go through like so and click these off. Alternatively, you can just go into your control panel, find all these small alkaline batteries, and toggle them off. And this is because we come back to them. Simple to similar metal battery produces a small amount of power, cannot be recharged. And that's kind of the important detail with these, is they cannot be recharged. So I have a habit of I will build the battery as early as I can in a build, just so that I can have it built. Because of that, we want to make sure that these are powered off so that we don't drain the power as we work on building up the rest of our rover. Come in here, grab our power blocks, small acid battery. We're just going to do these in groupings of 6. So we'll do them by layer. And of course, the fun part is tracking our production. 100 copper. There. And as you can notice, even with all the additional turbines, we are still running into a bit of a power deficit. Let's see, what do we still need? I think I grabbed... There we go. Now we put it in production. Alright. I just need copper wire and about 100 ice. Which, the ice part, fortunately for us, is rather easy to come by, given our present location. Another 42 copper wire. So, since this step is going to take a minute, we're going to go ahead and fast forward to after I get all of this welded up. So, I will see you guys in just a minute. So, it took a little bit of time, but we have all the batteries built. I also decided to jump ahead and get our transport crate and wheels all placed and built in. So what that leaves for us is our control method. Now, most of the time, in standard vanilla, you'd slap down a cockpit and call it a day. With Industrial Overhaul, we can't exactly do that for a couple reasons. The biggest thing that factors into it is going to be cost. I believe I may have gone over this earlier, but, bit of reiteration, is never a bad thing. If we grab our standard cockpit, you'll notice, most of the stuff we've already produced. Steel plate, construction components, copper wire, motors, basic computers. But then we have displays, advanced computers, synthetic fabric, and glass. Now, all of this is stuff that requires components and materials that we don't quite have access to yet. Displays require plastic. Advanced computers need gold wire. Synthetic fabric is made from polymers. And glass, we need a ceramic furnace for.
Low.
So, that's a lot of stuff that we don't have quite yet. So instead, what we use is the standard control scheme, as this just needs steel plate, construction components, copper wire, and basic computers. So this does mean that if you're starting on a if you're starting someplace that doesn't have an atmosphere, you're going to run in, you're going to need to make sure that you have a plentiful supply of oxygen bombs, as well as a source of oxygen, because it's going to be a little while before you're able to produce, or before you're able to build a pressurized cockpit. So, that is one of those bits that you have to keep in mind. So, we'll go ahead, wait for all those components to produce real quick. Since it's a relatively short list, it's not going to take too long. Alright, this is going to be 90 copper wire. We'll just feed some, just to keep the production line going. Few other bits with this. The standard progression through the Industrial Overhaul is once we find a source of sulfur, whether that's a sulfur deposit or we get ourselves to the point where we are refining oil. Um, the linear progression would then be to upgrade from the alkaline batteries. Again. From there to the acid, the simple sulfuric acid batteries. And if you're running with a mod like Scrap, you are kind of going to find yourself shoehorned into going that path. Just because, going after the unknown signals, you're not going to be able to salvage the lithium batteries intact. Instead, you're going to get the lithium battery, the lithium cell scrap instead of the whole cell. Since for this, we're not running with scrap, we've already collected 10 of the lithium power cells. So we are halfway to where we need to be in order to build a large, small grid lithium battery. Now, alternatively to building a independent rover like this, you could also turn your drop pod into a rover to make use of the lithium cell that's already on it. It'd be kind of a similar process, you'd yank the passenger seat, slap a control seat in, ditch the landing gear, replace those with wheels, get your wheelbase set out, and all that. So that would be doable. And later on, if you guys want, let me know in the comments, and I can do a quick little bit on that. It's really not too much different of a process from setting this up, so fairly straightforward. Now, because we are building this initially with these with the alkaline batteries, we're just going to leave the front end of this open for the time being. And that's just because, due to the nature of these cells, in order to replace them, since we can't recharge them, we have to grind them down entirely and rebuild them. And that's kind of hard to do if you build a full cab around the front. So we're going to wait to do that until after I've gathered enough of the lithium power cells to build a lithium battery on this. So, with all that said, we are almost ready to deploy. There's just a few components remaining. That being our gyro, which is, especially on rovers, can quite easily be one of, if not the most important blocks. I'm not going to worry about placing an antenna on here just yet. That will be coming down the road. The other bit is we need some form of ore detection. Now, there are two grades of ore detectors in Industrial Overhaul. The basic that you start with is your metal detector. Now, it has a relatively short range of only 200 meters, whereas the full ore detector has a range of 1 kilometer. So over vanilla, you have a much larger detection range, but this is also due in part to the fact that in Industrial Overhaul, your ores are spread out a lot further. So we'll get those built in. And then we'll be ready. We can go ahead, turn those on. You'll notice that we don't move particularly fast, and even as a rover, as soon as we start rolling, at full speed, we've got less than half an hour of power. So, doing it this way, you definitely want to build up a lot of those power cells. Just so that, as soon as your first set dies, you can go through and, replace them. So, what I'm going to go ahead and do is, well, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to scout out for some ore. Now, we've got ourselves, we're on top of an ice deposit, and in some of my earlier scouting, hunting after unknown signals, I found a nickel deposit just ahead here. So let's do a little more scouting around and see what else we can find. So we got the nickel that way. We'll head over a little bit between the west and west-southwest until we get clear of the ice field, and we'll see what other ore deposits we can find. And this is one of those bits where, again, Industrial Overhaul can prove to be quite frustrating for some people, because the ores are spaced very far apart compared to how they're handled in vanilla. Part of the idea for this, as Clockwork has stated on their mod page, is to encourage the construction of numerous remote bases, building up infrastructure, drone pads, stuff like that. A lot of stuff that is going to be made a lot easier with the automatons updated. So, definitely in that regard, something to be looking forward to. Still on top of our ice sheet. For reference, some of these ore sites, they can span, kilometers across. But also, since we are in the polar region, we're definitely going to be seeing a lot of ice. There's a very good chance that we may have to travel a good distance before we find anything else. And again, a lot of that is by design with this mod. There's going to be a lot of instances where the majority of, you're going to have to do a lot of traveling. And majority of your ores are going to be, anywhere between 1 and upwards of 12 kilometers away from your base. And they're going to be spaced, 1 to 2 kilometers apart from each other. It looks like my game's designed to be just a little temperamental today. It's either my game or my computer, one of the two. OBS doesn't seem to be freaking out at me, so I'm going to assume that it's probably just Space Engineers having a bit of a fit today. Not exactly convenient. It's disappointing. I was hoping that I'd find a surface deposit. Nope, just some bushes. Surface deposits do become incredibly useful with Industrial Overhaul, as in certain environments, there are some ores that will only show up as surface deposits. You run into that a little bit more running on other planets, especially like with Mars. But even on Earth, it breaks up the standard ore distribution just enough to sometimes be quite helpful. Now, admittedly, in most of my other Space Engineers gameplay, I haven't actually ended up on the North Pole in quite some time. This could certainly be interesting in terms of, navigating some of the terrain around. Because, at least from some of my initial glances from space, it looks like we've got a lot of mountains around us. Which is not exactly conducive to easy transit. Let's try venturing off the beaten path just a little bit. Obviously, we're not going to try and go too crazy with some of the mountain climbing, just because the metal wheels aren't best suited for some of that. So, the cliff driving, you want to be especially careful with these wheels. On relatively flat terrain, though, these do really, really well. Managed to catch a little bit of air there. Getting back down is certainly going to be a bit of a trick. That's something I probably should have taken into consideration before deciding to... would you look at that. surface deposit. What have we found? Iron. Fantastic. This is definitely something that we can use. And as some of you may recall from the first episode, iron is something that can be refined in the survival kit in Industrial Overhaul. You know, it's going to be at a much lower efficiency, but it can still be done, which is very much to our benefit in situations like this. We're going to dig up a nice little chunk out of this rock. And then we are going to very, very carefully navigate our way back to the main polar ice sheet. I say carefully because, you know, we just barely finished this rover. We don't want to crash it just yet. Yeah, as you can see, you know, we are, you know, almost 10 kilometers away from our spawn pod, and, you know, we haven't found any other resources, which, you know, like I said, you're going to have to do a fair bit of travel with Industrial Overhaul. And so if that's something that, you know, isn't to your playstyle, you know, I will always recommend that people, you know, give Industrial Overhaul a try. But, you know, I, again, will always give some of those disclaimers of there's certain things about the mod that, you know, not everyone is going to be fond of. And that is 100% okay. You know, there's plenty of mods out there that I myself am not, you know, super fond of. But, you know, if it's something that I know there are a number of other people that do enjoy those mods, you know, I will still throw a recommendation for them. How would you look at that? Another surface deposit, or is that a bush? Ah, that's another surface deposit. Let's see what this one is. Silicon. Silicon will be useful for us. Ow. Silicon will be useful for us later, particularly once we get to the point of doing glass work and the like. All that ice. since we don't want to kill our batteries on our first trip out, let's go ahead and, you know, we'll still do a bit of a, we'll still be searching for any other ore deposits, but we'll focus mainly on just trying to get back to base. Now, I do have the speed limit turned down on these wheels. I've got it set to 120. And that's just because, because they are a lower power and, lower control and stability, you don't want to be going full speed on these wheels because there's a much, much higher probability of you losing control while driving. So when you're running metal wheels, yes, it is going to be a little more time consuming on the travel aspect, but my biggest recommendation is to turn the speed setting down a little bit. Bring the friction up a bit more, bring the strength kind of mid-level, but keep the speed limit low. And that's going to be the best way to avoid any major problems. And would you look at that? Nickel. Surface deposits, we've already found the main three resources, which is excellent. That's a good way to start things off. Now that does still leave plenty of other resources that we will need. Copper is always going to be a big one that you'll need a lot of. And as we progress, cobalt, titanium, lithium, niter. Niter replaces magnesium, and so you need niter plus a few other things to make gunpowder, which you need for your munitions. So that's another bit, another lovely little bit of added complexity that I myself quite enjoy. Continue on our way back to base, and I will see you once we make it back. So, back at camp, parked up. We've got all of our iron ore transferred over. We'll go ahead and we'll move this over. As you can see, that works through very quickly, refining the iron. But, as you can see, we're not building up a whole lot very quickly. Weighing that out, we're producing iron at intervals of about, 1.5. So, this is not going to be a quick process. It'll refine through quickly, but it's not going to be high yield. And so that's something you're going to have to keep in mind when you're initially running through and using your survival kit to refine iron, if you're able to find it relatively early on. It's a good way to help, give yourself a bit of a head start, because there is a lot of stuff that requires iron. And so being able to refine as much of it as you can early on will definitely be beneficial to you in later game stages, helping you get to those points a bit more quickly. So, but, there you guys have it. That is our first rover. Very simplistic. It does take a bit of time to build, especially in terms of these batteries, just because the power cells produce at a very slow rate in the assembly bench. So it definitely it definitely takes some patience, and doubly so if you're not able to harvest the lithium power cells from the unknown signals, due to running off scrap or just not going after unknown signals. Um, but this right here, you know, this concept, this design, at least in my opinion and in my experience, is going to be the best way to get yourself started with a rover in Industrial Overhaul. Because this gives you everything that you need for a basic cargo rover, and you can get it built fairly early on. So, uh, next episode, we're going to focus on expanding our power production. Since we are sitting on a sheet of ice, hydrogen power is going to be the naturally assumed progression. So that's going to be our next episode: is power production and expanding our base with more of the production blocks and getting things linked up, and with a proper conveyor system. So that's what you guys have to look forward to from me next time. And until then, take care, everyone.